Britain entered the Second World War with a reputation for disciplined gunnery, precise fire control, and a deep institutional memory of artillery use stretching back to the First World War. But among all the weapons in its arsenal, few inspired the same mixture of awe, fear, and fascination as its railway-mounted heavy guns. These massive pieces, some weighing over 100 tons, were not ordinary field artillery. They were descendants of the great siege weapons of the Victorian Empire, engineered to crush fortifications, silence distant batteries, and project firepower well beyond the limits of conventional guns. When the Wehrmacht studied British coastal defenses and heavy artillery deployments in 1940 and 1941, it was these railway guns that appeared repeatedly in German intelligence assessments, often highlighted with one unsettling conclusion. If these guns were ever turned inland, they could devastate German invasion forces before they reached the beaches. The railway gun was, in many ways, a paradox. It belonged to an era when empires measured power in steel, weight, and barrel length, a time when the Royal Navy's big gun philosophy influenced every corner of British military planning. Yet, despite their origins in the age of dreadnoughts, Britain's railway guns found renewed purpose in a war dominated by tanks, aircraft, and mechanized maneuver. German planners, especially those studying Operation Sea Lion, viewed them as credible threats capable of halting bridgeheads, eliminating coastal artillery positions, and destroying supply concentrations before they could form. Even Luftwaffe officers assessing the viability of neutralizing Britain's heavy guns acknowledged that the reinforced emplacements and long-range accuracy of these giants made them difficult targets. Their presence was not symbolic. Throughout 1940 to 1944, Britain's railway guns participated in real engagements, countering German batteries along the French coast, firing across the Channel at enemy positions near Calais, and supporting deception and suppression efforts during Allied preparations for the Normandy landings. Their sheer physical footprint, the complexity of their firing procedures, and the industrial infrastructure required to operate them turned each gun into a mobile fortress of steel. A single shot could travel more than 20 miles, reaching targets that German field artillery could not hope to match. And for Wehrmacht units within range, the psychological effect was immediate. Veterans often recalled the thunderous report, the earth trembling underfoot, and the knowledge that the shell landing minutes later might weigh more than a small car. Yet the story of these super-heavy weapons is not simply one of intimidation or spectacle. Their development, deployment, and operational use reveal how Britain adapted pre-war assets to meet modern needs, how industrial limitations shaped battlefield decision-making, and how a technology some considered obsolete became a key component of defensive strategy during the most dangerous years of the war. To understand why they mattered and why German intelligence feared them so deeply, we must begin with the origins and evolution of British railway artillery, long before the Wehrmacht ever heard their thunder. Although Britain's railway guns became symbols of home-front defiance during the Second World War, their lineage stretched back to an entirely different kind of conflict, one defined by static siege warfare and imperial logistics rather than mechanized blitzkrieg. The earliest British railway guns appeared during the First World War, when the Western Front's entrenched stalemate revealed a clear need for long-range, high-caliber artillery capable of reaching targets far behind enemy lines. Britain already possessed large-caliber naval guns, some of them too heavy or too outdated for modern warships, but still capable of delivering destructive shells with exceptional range. Mounting them on rail platforms offered a practical solution: mobility along secure lines, a stable firing base, and the ability to reposition quickly without the weeks required to emplace fixed heavy artillery. The interwar years saw most nations reduce or retire their super-heavy guns as air power and more mobile artillery seemed poised to dominate future warfare. But Britain, wary of geopolitical uncertainty and keenly aware of its extensive coastline, retained several types of railway artillery. These included 9.2-inch, 12-inch, and even the massive BL 18-inch gun MKI, one of the largest guns ever mounted on rails anywhere in the world. While many of these weapons were considered aging or specialized, they provided capabilities unmatched by conventional field artillery. Their firing ranges, often exceeding 20 miles, made them ideal for counter-battery missions, port defense, and long-distance interdiction. When the Wehrmacht overran Western Europe in 1940 and German guns began firing across the Channel from Pas-de-Calais, Britain's decision to maintain its railway artillery suddenly looked prescient. Heavy German batteries such as Battery Todt and Battery Lindemann could reach Dover and other coastal towns, posing a direct threat to both civilian areas and Allied military infrastructure. Britain responded by deploying its railway guns to carefully selected positions along the southern coast, constructing reinforced sidings, camouflage netting systems, ammunition stores, and fire control stations designed to withstand counter-battery fire and aerial reconnaissance. Contrary to popular belief, these guns were not immobile relics simply parked along the cliffs. They belonged to integrated coastal defense networks that included the Royal Navy, the Army's Coast Artillery Branch, and air defense units. Fire missions often relied on coordinated observation posts, radar measurements, rangefinders, and aerial spotting when available. When German long-range artillery opened fire on British ports, the railway guns answered, accurately and with enough force that German reports frequently noted the difficulty of neutralizing them. The roots of this capability lay not in improvised wartime solutions but in decades of accumulated engineering and operational experience. Britain had kept the knowledge alive, maintained the infrastructure, and retained crews trained to handle weapons weighing over 150 tons. This continuity ensured that when the moment came, the heavy guns could be brought to readiness far faster than the Wehrmacht had anticipated, setting the stage for a prolonged duel across the English Channel. By the time the Channel guns began their exchanges in 1940 and 1941, Britain's railway artillery had evolved into a sophisticated combination of naval engineering, land-based fire control, and hardened coastal defense. But understanding why the Wehrmacht regarded these guns with such deep concern requires a closer examination of their technical characteristics and operational capabilities. Unlike conventional artillery, which relied on mobility and moderate rates of fire, railway guns traded mobility for unmatched range, shell weight, and destructive potential. Their barrels, some exceeding 50 feet in length, were naval-grade forgings capable of firing projectiles that weighed as much as a small automobile. Even a single hit from a 12 or 18-inch shell could demolish reinforced concrete structures, sever rail lines, collapse ammunition depots, or obliterate troop concentrations. What troubled German intelligence most was accuracy. While large-caliber guns could be notoriously imprecise when used without proper fire control, Britain had spent decades refining its methods. Observation posts along the cliffs of Kent and Sussex tracked targets through high-powered optical instruments. Radar installations improved ranging precision, particularly in poor visibility. Sound-ranging equipment and flash-spotting teams provided triangulation for counter-battery missions. All of this was coordinated through a command system that integrated coast artillery units with naval intelligence, aerial reconnaissance, and coastal radar. The result was an artillery network capable of identifying German batteries, calculating trajectories, and delivering heavy fire with impressive reliability. The guns themselves were not uniform. Britain deployed a mixture of calibers depending on strategic needs. The 9.2-inch Mark 13, for instance, could fire a 380-pound shell more than 20 miles, while the 12-inch Gladiator could reach even further. Most imposing of all was the BL 18-inch railway gun, originally a naval experiment whose shells weighed over 3,000 pounds. Mounted on a reinforced railway chassis, it became one of the most powerful mobile artillery pieces ever brought into operational service. German reports repeatedly acknowledged that these guns represented serious threats to fortifications and staging areas along the French coast. Additionally, the reinforced firing positions along the British coastline were engineered to survive counter-battery efforts and Luftwaffe strikes. Compartments were cut into chalk cliffs or camouflaged beneath reinforced concrete shelters. Rail spurs were constructed to allow rapid movement to alternate firing points, reducing the effectiveness of German targeting. Some guns could fire and then immediately retreat into protective tunnels, a practice that frustrated German gunners attempting to register accurate counterfire. This combination of precision, destructive force, and engineered survivability meant that Britain's railway guns were far more than static monuments of an earlier era. They were integrated instruments of deterrence, and as the German occupation of France matured, they became significant obstacles to German plans in the Channel theater. As the duel across the Channel intensified after 1941, Britain's railway guns shifted from deterrent assets to active participants in a long-range artillery war unprecedented in modern history. This exchange, sometimes referred to as the Channel Gun War, saw British and German super-heavy artillery attempting to suppress one another, disrupt logistics, and shape the broader operational environment without ever crossing the sea. German batteries such as Lindemann, Todt, and Grosser were powerful, heavily reinforced installations capable of launching sustained bombardments against Dover, Folkestone, and surrounding areas. Yet despite their size and engineering sophistication, they struggled to silence the British guns positioned along the coast. The British advantage came from the adaptability of their fire control and the mobility of their firing positions. While German batteries were fixed in concrete casemates, Britain's guns operated on rail spurs designed to offer multiple firing sites. Crews could move the guns between positions, adjust elevation and bearing through reinforced platforms, and coordinate with observation posts miles away. When a German battery fired, its muzzle flash or sound signature was immediately detected by British observers, who calculated its position and ordered counter-battery fire. This responsiveness, combined with the destructive potential of large-caliber shells, made it risky for German batteries to engage for prolonged periods. Furthermore, Britain's railway guns played a central role in denying the Wehrmacht confidence in any potential cross-channel reinforcement or resupply effort. Though Operation Sea Lion was effectively suspended after the Luftwaffe failed to secure air superiority, German planners continued to study coastal vulnerabilities, supply routes, and embarkation points. British heavy artillery, especially the guns capable of reaching Calais and Boulogne, complicated these assessments. German engineering units often reported that ammunition dumps, rail junctions, and assembly areas within range of British guns required extensive fortification, camouflage, or dispersal. Even when the British guns were not firing, their existence forced German units to modify their dispositions, invest resources in protection, and restrict large-scale movements during daylight hours. By 1943, the strategic value of these guns expanded further. Allied intelligence operations, deception campaigns, and preparations for the Normandy invasion required suppressing German observation posts and artillery along the French coast. British railway guns contributed to these suppression efforts, delivering long-range harassing fire intended to degrade German readiness and complicate their ability to monitor shipping movements in the Strait of Dover. These bombardments were not random. They relied on detailed intelligence gathered by aerial photography, radar tracking, and coastal observers who identified weaknesses in German defensive positions. The increasing tempo of long-range exchanges demonstrated that Britain's railway guns were no mere historical curiosities. They were modernized, integrated instruments of strategic pressure, grinding down German installations long before Allied troops set foot on French soil. By the final years of the war, the operational role of Britain's railway guns had shifted once again, this time from coastal defense and counter-battery warfare toward strategic shaping operations in support of large Allied offensives. As preparations for Operation Overlord accelerated in early 1944, every asset capable of degrading German observation, artillery, and logistical infrastructure became part of a coordinated Allied strategy. Britain's railway guns were assigned critical tasks in the pre-invasion fire plan, harassing major German batteries, striking transport hubs around Calais, and suppressing fortified positions overlooking the Channel. Their long-range capability allowed them to impose constant pressure on German coastal defenses in the months leading up to D-Day, compelling the Wehrmacht to divert manpower and resources to repair damage, reinforce casemates, and maintain readiness. Although their fire alone could not neutralize the heaviest German batteries, many of which were protected by reinforced concrete several meters thick, the persistent bombardment disrupted maintenance cycles, limited observation opportunities, and forced German gunners to operate in shorter, more cautious bursts. British intelligence reports from the spring of 1944 noted that German counter-battery fire had become increasingly hesitant, with some batteries firing only sporadically to avoid drawing railway gun retaliation. This decrease in German activity, though subtle, contributed to the broader Allied objective of reducing enemy situational awareness along the Channel while invasion preparations unfolded. After the landings in June 1944, the strategic context shifted dramatically. As Allied troops advanced inland, the Channel duel diminished in importance, but the guns continued to support operations where their range was relevant. Some provided fire during the pursuit toward Belgium, though the rapid pace of Allied movement soon outstripped the practical limits of railway-based artillery. By the autumn of 1944, most of Britain's surviving super-heavy guns transitioned into reserve or coastal standby roles, though they remained operational until the threat of German long-range retaliation diminished. Their lasting significance, however, did not end with the war. The presence and performance of Britain's railway guns had demonstrated several enduring principles: the value of integrating legacy weapons into modern fire control networks, the deterrent effect of super-heavy artillery when properly employed, and the ability of well-trained crews to deliver precision fire from platforms originally designed decades earlier. Even as guided missiles and jet aircraft emerged in the post-war era, military analysts studying the Channel campaigns noted how these guns shaped German planning, imposed constant pressure on fortified positions, and influenced the broader balance of power along one of the war's most sensitive front lines. If you have enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit subscribe and let me know in the comments. Where in the world are you watching from? I always love seeing the global community gather around these stories.